Tonight we come to the observer. Now, I have dressed like an observer, the absent-minded professor. Lab coat, if you can see, it's very dirty. That doesn't worry him in the least. Collar up, tie crooked. He has absolutely no concept of his appearance, of social graces, because everything that matters is observing and taking notes. Maybe not literally, but that's how it is. With a clipboard in his hand, 4 pens in his pocket, that's your observer. Not going to take a chance of one pen going dry while he's trying to take notes. That's the observer. And by the way, I'll tell you in the 6, the power they have discovered if someone has a white coat on and a clipboard. And that's what the 5 has discovered. It's actually a very good protection, this white coat and this clipboard. It keeps people at bay. And that is very much what a 5 is trying to do with his life. The illusion of the 5 is, if only I can know and perceive, everything will be okay. If only I can work it out in my brain, everything will be okay. And where the artist is predominantly right brain, of course, the observer is predominantly left brain. They try to work everything out, as if life is one big mathematical problem that can be solved. I knew of a mother who was actually in great distress, and her daughter told me many years later how she would come home from school needing mommy, and mommy would take an hour and a half, quite soon after she came home from school, to lock herself in her room and work out mathematical problems, literally. Like this was sacred and they were not allowed in. It was her way, actually, of keeping away from her children. I think, therefore I am, is the motto of the 5. I think, therefore I am. And 5s quite often tend to be quite intelligent people. An unintelligent 5 is quite a sad thing. Their fear is emotional engagement. They want to stay away from emotional engagement. All this right brain stuff, all this emotion stuff, a lot of nonsense. It all is and needs to be in black and white. The trouble with a world that's all in black and white is who wants it? Who wants to live in a black and white world? But in fact, the 5 is quite content to do that. Let's keep this all safe. That is the big thing, because they fear emotional involvement as very unsafe. Now, at its funniest, it is funny. It's the typical absent-minded professor. He doesn't know where he's left anything. His clothing's always a mess. One absent-minded professor arrived in class, and he had a box in front of him, and he said to his students, "Now I have an example of a rare South American frog to show you today." And he opened the box and looked at it quite confused, and then said, "That's very strange. I could have sworn I ate my lunch." You know, the absent-minded professor, and we joke about it. And they really are. Their wives have to tell them everything, or their husbands do, because they just live in this academic mental world, but real down-to-earth things over their heads. At its saddest and most tragic, it's autism, where the emotional world has become so terrifying that they withdraw from it completely. Remember the wonderful story, Rain Man, played by Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, where Rain Man brilliantly portrayed the autistic person, the person who has totally withdrawn from society. At one point, he was given the phone book to read, and his brother discovered that he could quote name and phone number for page after page. And I thought, no, that's really far-fetched, until I did some reading on this. They can work out prime numbers to 5 or 6 digits in the head. It takes computers hours to work that out, but they can do it. Amazing things. That capacity is genuine, because it's someone who's withdrawn totally into even the mathematical part of the left brain. And then it's very tragic, because there is no ability in emotional interchange. But most people aren't either the absent-minded professor or autistic, but somewhere in the middle. But the heart of it is that they actually don't want emotional involvement. Their sin, their capital sin, you would never guess. It is avarice or stinginess. Now, that doesn't mean for money, because in fact, number 5s are often quite careless about things to do with money. Their wives usually do the finances. It's not to do with money. They are stingy with themselves, with sharing themselves. They hold themselves back. They don't get emotionally involved. They don't give anything. They're always taking in. The more I can take in, the better. They're greedy for knowledge. They want to know, they want to understand, but they give very little back. I'm talking the unredeemed 5. There's a very great danger of that. And they also can be aloof and can show a great lack of empathy. By the way, I forgot in the number 4 to put as one of their gifts, when they can rouse themselves out of their inwardness, there is no one more empathetic than a number 4, because 4s deeply, deeply understand emotion. And if a 4 can rouse himself, you want no one more than a number 4 to help you understand your own emotion. But a number 5 will never be a great empathy person, but lack of empathy is a sin. Lack of love for one another. You will often find that a number 5 is not an emotional person. They will say they're not emotional, but in fact they are. They are very emotional underneath, but they find it very difficult to get in touch with that. The country, where do you keep a stiff upper lip? England, the upper class Englishman with a moustache to help keep his upper lip stiff and not to show emotion. One person went into the Navy and was on an officer's course, and part of the officer's course was we do not show emotion. Ratings can show emotion, but officers are above that sort of thing. And that was very much inculcated into the English upper class. The royal family of England, from what we can gather, is very characterized by 5 energy. This stay stiff, don't show your emotion, don't talk about your emotion. And you can just see it there, can't you? That reserve that she is so famous for, and that, from what we gather, Charles found extremely painful as a child, that there was not the empathy, there was not feeling. You don't talk about that sort of thing. That's why Diana's arrival was such a problem to them. Got a picture here of Diana and Queen. That's a very deceptive picture, isn't it? The Queen looking very happy and comfortable, but the truth behind closed doors was very different, because Diana was not 1 inch a 5. I've thought a lot about what she was, and I think she was probably a 2-4 combination. The very last thing they wanted in that royal family. Lots of emotion, and her engagement with her sons has been very typical. And lots of artiness and tremendous emotional ups and downs. It nearly tore the royal family apart. And then we come to the animal. The owl. They sit up in their tree and observe everything with big eyes. The thing about an owl is those enormous eyes. They sit up there, they don't make a sound. And they will sit and observe you. And they might be no more than 6 feet above your head. But the moment you make eye contact, they will fly away. And that is very typical of the number 5. And then the arrows. The 5, with his tendency to emotional disengagement and to inaction, it's really bad for him to move towards the 7 with their potential for shallowness. There's nothing sadder than a shallow number 5. You got examples of that in the British aristocracy, and we called it the English dandy. I don't know if any of you remember that phrase. Someone totally taken up with trivia, but no emotional depth at all. Really good for the 5 to move surprisingly towards the number 8, characterized by audacious engagement. One great example of a redeemed number 5 was Dedrick Bonhoeffer during the Second World War. He was a through and through academic. But when the time came to take a moral stand and be audacious and courageous, he joined in with a plot to try and murder Hitler. It was a very brave thing and incredibly difficult for a 5. They like to keep in their tower and take notes about this thing called Nazism, but when the time came, he didn't. And then his letters from prison after he was caught, the most wonderful letters that you might ever read. And his emotional letters to his mother, fabulous thing to read, that only really a 5 can do, because that emotion is hard for them to source, and he sourced it. And he knows he's in deadly danger. And he wrote those Christmas letters to his mother that are precious. And by April, just before the end of the war, he was executed. But the courage when a 5 moves towards the 8 and is willing to engage and willing to get involved and be active, it's a great thing. I do like sometimes, as I did on a previous occasion, to talk about who marries who. People often ask me that. And the answer is there's no right and wrong as to who marries who. Just don't marry an unredeemed anything. And don't be an unredeemed anything. But certain of them are actually worth noting. The 5 with his emotional stability, because the detachment gives him stability, or her, is attracted to the 2 with their emotional involvement. They admire that. I wish I could be emotionally involved like that. And it's really an example of opposites attracting. And the 5 and the 2 often attract. I think they hope they'll save each other, especially the 2 hopes they'll save the 5 and teach this person to be emotionally attracted. And I've known 2 or 3 couples, the 2-5 marriage. And it's been very hard work for both of them to accept the limitations of the other. And so they are attracted to one another. Now, what the 5 with this emotional stability, but also emotional unengagement, needs to do, he needs to kiss a few frogs. No one likes to kiss a frog, but no one hates it more than a number 5. I'm going to do something that actually no 5 would ever do in public. I'm going to sing you a song from Kermit the Frog. Do you remember in the fairy tale how the wicked witch's spell turned the handsome prince to a toad? By the power of her potion, she handed him the notion he was lower than the dirt in the road. But though she left him green and warded, her evil plan was thwarted when perchance there happened by a young miss, who in spite of his complexion offered her affection and broke the wicked curse with a kiss. Well, if you've never been a frog kissing, then you don't know what you've been missing. There's a world of opportunity under each and every law. If you've never been a charm breaker, if you've never been a handsome prince maker, then slow down, turn around, bend down and kiss you a frog. There's a happy ever after land deep in the heart of man, where a prince or princess abides. But all you get are glimpses of a handsome prince or princess, 'cause they're covered by a green warty hide. And though they're full of life's potential, they lack in one essential that enables them to shine like a star. And that's to have some guy or missus smother them with kisses and love them while they're just like they are. Well, if you've never been a frog kissing, then you don't know what you've been missing. There's a world of opportunity under each and every law. If you've never been a charm breaker, if you've never been a handsome prince maker, then slow down, turn around, bend down and kiss you a frog. And that's the secret of frog kissing. You can do it too if you just listen. Just slow down, turn around, bend down and kiss you a frog. Now, a 5 would never be seen dead making a fool of himself like that. He would give a lecture on nuclear physics, but never sing frog kissing, much less ever kiss one. Now, the gifts of the 5. Firstly, wisdom. The gift of wisdom, of course, because they observe, they gather, hopefully they're reasonably intelligent, and at the end of the day, you want a 5 on your board at church. You want others too, but you want a 5 because there's wisdom there. I remember a board where we had a 5, and often we would have long-ranging discussions. He would sit quiet. And then right near the end, he would say something, and you'd all stop and say, that's it. That's it. Because he'd observed, he'd listened, he'd taken in, and then gave out. And with this wonderful gift of wisdom. The most unexpected gift of the redeemed 5 is simplicity. Jesus was so simple. Children gravitated towards him. He taught in stories. And yet he could, in those stories, make the truth hard for those to understand who didn't want to understand. Simple. He just takes a coin and he completely flattens his questioners with the most simple answer: give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. And they're stumped with the simplest answer. And simplicity is a great gift. Einstein himself, the great gift of brain, of observation, but also of simplicity. Do you know that he literally went up into his attic for 5 days? And just by having observed the world and then thinking about it, he came down with the simplest little equation: E equals mc squared. And the whole world was changed. The amazing gift of the redeemed 5 to take in, to observe, and then actually to come up with simplicity. Examples in Scripture. I'm going to give you 2 of them. One is Thomas, who at the time was an unredeemed 5. We read after the resurrection that when Jesus first appeared, Thomas was not with them. There's the stinginess with his presence. Why wasn't he with them? Well, he liked to withdraw when he was unhappy and needed to work things out. So he wasn't there and he didn't see the risen Jesus. And when they tell him, what's his answer? Unless I see, I won't believe. There's your 5. I've got to see it, I've got to observe it for myself, then I'll think about believing. And interestingly, when Jesus finally comes, he says, touch me, Thomas. Don't just look, touch. Because 5s need to touch. They need to kiss frogs. 2s sometimes need to be told not to touch. Do you remember when Mary Magdalene met him in the garden? Jesus' word to her was, don't cling. Don't cling. Because they can cling. 5 stay aloof, and so he says, Thomas, reach out your hand and touch. And you will not just see, I want you to feel as well. But the wonderful redeemed 5 was Mary, the mother of Jesus, with her capacity to observe. And we read at the end of Luke chapter 2, Mary kept all these things and treasured them in her heart. She pondered them. She went over them until she made sense out of them. And we believe that much of Luke's gospel arises from Luke's interviews with Mary. Having pondered and felt and thought, she came out with wonderful truth about her own son. And then the example of Jesus himself. In Luke chapter 2, verse 4, we read, they were amazed at his understanding. We're talking about a 12-year-old boy, stumping the teachers of the law with his amazing answers. No man ever spake like this man. But this little boy had been for 12 years taking in, hearing teaching, thinking. And at 12, when he's first allowed to open the Torah, he astounds them with his knowledge. Mark chapter 4, verse 14. He chose 12 that they might be with him. I don't think I could ever bear to live with 12 people for 3 years, day and night. We would end up, I don't know where we'd end up. And a 5 would never do that. Marriage is difficult for a 5 with one person. But Jesus is never like that. He engages. And as you read the story of his living with those 12, it was deep engagement. He refused to be a disengaged, aloof person. And then in Luke 22, verse 15, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. The deep feelings of which Jesus was capable. And this is one little example. The Greek of that is literally, I've desired with desire. It means I can't put it stronger, how deep I feel. And here is Jesus, this amazing 5, and yet with deep, deep feeling. But most notable of all was Jesus' habit of withdrawing. We read in Mark, Jesus withdrew privately to a solitary place. It said 3 times, private, solitary, withdrew. And do you know that sort of verse occurs 25 times in the Gospel of Mark. This was the center of his living, this habit of withdrawing to reflect and to draw on his God.